Ooh, what up, old Uncle 2? Back with you once again for another weekly outlook. This week, we're going to hit you with S&P and Bitcoin as always. We're going to do a little sprinkle of Solana in there for the large cap altcoin market perspective that we like to give. And then for our wild card this week, we're going to go revisit oil and see how our breakout call from a few weeks ago has played. All right, and so this is something that we've been looking at here, and we know we call that this should be sort of ugly within here, but we kind of thought that we might get a clean, sort of scary, impulsive move to the downside last week, unless we got a tweezer bottom. And this is exactly that right here, a tweezer bottom. As you can see, you got the handle, and the little tweeze. So we have our tweezer bottom, and then we're coming right back down to retest. And then currently in pre-market trading, Sunday evening here, we're sort of rejecting to the upside, and the overall taste of indecision continues. So I don't think, obviously, it's not going to play out sort of in this sort of traditional impulsive structure to the downside here, since we got that tweezer bottom now. So all we need to do is look and reassess, and we know that we're in a time of uncertainty, economic uncertainty, geopolitical uncertainty, earnings uncertainty. We're just, employment uncertainty. It's just a time. The only thing that's certain is uncertainty. So what we're going to pay attention to now is that we're going to go ahead and take this clean impulsive structure off the map. And we're going to go ahead and just think that this is potentially going to come down and continue to chop and continue to diverge potentially, right? So see, we didn't make a new low here, but see how high the RSI is relative to this low? I would call that a bit of a potential divergence. And even if we do reject down, which it seems that we probably will, because you get these illiquid moves pre-market on Sunday are usually the wrong way. And I think the people that are doing it know exactly what they're doing. But you'll typically see that tomorrow's trading would likely be down, but then this oscillator here has a potential to make a higher low when it does, coming into our zone, as we see that we sort of rejected here at the 50, as we kind of always seem to on this move up. However, we did come back down and retest or break through and then test this lower area last time. And I think that is very likely to happen now. It just, whether or not we make it down to this second zone is sort of the only thing I'm a bit iffy on. I still lean that direction. But the more that we get these sort of like strong reversals that you just don't get any continued downside selling, the less and less it becomes likely that we just make these lower lows, and this market just continues to sort of find support like it always tends to. We talked about wave fours of one lesser degree. It's just very, very common in this market. So we're going to see that probably unfold here potentially, even though I want it to, basically with the fear and greed and things that they're quite low. They've gotten, I think, the lowest, the extreme fear on the CNN Fear and Greed Index was at potentially all-time low last week. So, to get that and not even make a new low relative to this move, kind of interesting. Maybe we never do break external of what we're in now. At the very least, I'm going to look for this to get faded and come back to this zone, put in more divergence, and then at that point, we should probably, let's say, we'll say this is going to remain sort of internal, come down. Maybe we'll get something like this. I'm not going to get too caught up in exactly how it looks as it plays. But what I want to see is more of this. This is what I want to start seeing, to see this low coming in, that divergence, that bottoming look that we talked about. Nothing here. Kind of, at the low of the near the low of the range. I don't see a long at this point. I don't see a short being this low at on this far down in the range. Potentially look for that bottoming type signal at the low of the range. You could take a range play, but other than that, it's kind of in a no trade zone at the moment. Bitcoin, we started having this. We were playing out almost exactly how we thought we should. we labeled here as this is just a bullish potential that's on the chart. Or actually it shows the bull and the bear as a 1/A, and then of course there was the 3/. This one is off the table because this is clearly not that degree 4, right? No, let me see. Yeah, definitely not. So this degree is off the table. Doesn't mean we can't finish the bigger degrees to the low. However, the way that it's shaping up, we still have this 1/A in play. However, as much as this looked like we were going to go ahead and come down and take this low, this 55 area that we were sort of expecting, it didn't quite happen. We didn't break the low of this base channel. It sort of held the market together yet again, right? So now we're drifting up weaker and weaker on more and more divergence. This is the 12-hour. We're going down to the 4-hour. Look at this, 1, 2, 3. Even slightly downward sloping as we slope up on the price. That's just, a very weak looking chart. And I like to say, we're not even really at the level of resistance that this kind of look would set us up for one of those glorious failures. I was going to say when, divergence is very, very reliable, but typically when a bottom is put in, it will shrug, divergence I like to call it, where you'll put in all this divergence and it looks very weak, but then it just shrugs it and it moons. But normally you're at a larger level of resistance than what we're sitting at here. So this just very much sort of looks like we're still just putting in some sort of a C on this side. Something like this. Before we just finish weaker to the high, don't even get to the top of the base channel, and then we break to the low. So that's sort of what we're looking for on Bitcoin to this point. The bullish outcomes are still there. Like we can't toss them out. They're just not our favorite. See, we're looking more like this than we're looking like, let's see, that, of course, this, of course, this, so as we come out of it, you see, we never, as ugly as this has been, but look at sloped correctly, right? So that's clearly a 1, 2, 1, 2. It just, it could be. It could be. It just feels very weak. It looks very much like this, and oftentimes you'll see these fractals on the way down, and especially in Bitcoin, where they'll match on the move down. The fractals will just match very well, and that seems to be what is happening here. So I would suspect this is more of an A, and this is what I've been telling you for weeks now. Just the agony continues. Like I said, embrace the suck, embrace the range. It does feel like it's coming a bit to getting toward the end of it, but just embrace the suck. All right, let's get on to Solana. Okay, so Solana, and a couple weeks ago, I sort of, made a a catchy little saying on Twitter that for me, the low on Link is in, and but when I say that, that became the primary expectation. So we went from barely having another low to come in the driver's seat of the probable expectations on that to switching, that came to the passenger seat, and now the low end became the driver. So it's a little bit of a, a catchy thing to say, but that does become the most probable expectation at that point. But the rest of the alts, I hadn't really seen that setting up. However, I think I want to say the same thing about Solana, is I don't think that we're going to take another low end relative to this 67.49 level. We could, absolutely. It just, we're moving a new low. See, as we see, we've been expecting another low down here, right? But I think that we're moving this to the passenger seat, and I think that we might be forming some sort of a leading diagonal out of here. Unlike Bitcoin, this looks quite nice. So in an environment where Bitcoin goes down to take out its quick, like that stab lower that I've been talking about, this sort of gives credence to that potential, because Bitcoin's not going to have an extended downturn and Solana doesn't take a new low, right? So if that happens, this is going for the new low. It's just how it is. That's the way the cryptoverse works. But if Bitcoin makes a sharp stab lower, the altcoins could have relative strength. They take their stab lower and don't create a new low, and then we're off for a wave 3 potential. And I say off doesn't mean you're going to rip right away, but this is a leading diagonal if that's the case. Oh, that doesn't look impulsive. Well, no kidding. It looks like a diagonal. So if we walk through it and we go impulse, correction, impulse, 1. Oops. We got to put the 0 at the bottom though, boys. So impulse, correction, impulse, zigzag, 2, impulse, correction. Well, actually, this throws a bit of a monkey wrench in there, and it's a diagonal triangle, as they used to call it, because they're difficult, right? So what we would expect to see is some sort of zigzag family of corrective but actionary waves that form out this motive structure. So if this is an impulse, we can't have this being a zigzag. That wouldn't, well, not to be the C of that second leg of that third wave. So what we would probably expect to see, even though it's outside of typical expectation, is that we actually have a sideways that we put in here, a running flat with a diagonal C being put in now. And this very much does look like a potential diagonal play. So we might see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, another little stab higher, another stab weaker, divergence. Then it rips down, gets scary, but then one more high after that. Right? And then that could be a potential for a diagonal. So let's just color this white. So basically, instead of trying to call that the diagonal is sort of the end is nigh, like it's here now, I just think that, this tells us that there's more fuckery about, as opposed to trying to look into our crystal ball and do all kinds of mental gymnastics and backflips, as I like to say. All we know is that this tells us that this is likely to continue on for a bit, and my expectation based on the context that we have is that we will continue to drift to the upside while it continues on, but in a weak sort of way, right? Until finally it squeezes so much and puts in so much divergence, it just drips down, right? Now, when that happens, we would expect a swift, deep retracement for a leading diagonal. So it's not like we won't probably get lower. So probably somewhere into the range of, I don't know. It depends on how high we get right now. Let's just pull to there, pull to here. It doesn't matter. This is all very guesswork. Let's just say this is the MZ and the 786. And then once it gets to that level is when you can sort of get that return. So this is where Bitcoin would be making that new low potentially, right? Relative low to the bear move that we're in, the larger bear move. But this could find relative support before that were to happen. Now, one thing that is pretty cool about our former partner Monty, this is his MZ Monty Zone. He came up with this. Another thing that he came up with that I used to hate and I kind of have grown to love, because it's really just Elliott Wave, right? Like this is sort of a easier version of Elliott Wave. What I'm about to show you is he calls this an MZ, where you get these like mega wicks to the downside, and then you switch over to like a line and maybe a little bit higher time frame potentially. You get these moves where in line you'll create a new low, this fifth, but in real life it's not going to make a new low. And it normally, and for him it comes down to the MZ. I like the 786, whatever, 6 and 1, half dozen the other. This whole zone is important to watch, right? And I see that we have some structure here that we're watching. So I think I like the confluence right to the MZ, actually right on the structure. And this is assuming that the high is here. So this is all very, again, sort of guesswork at this point. But this would be sort of your MZ, and you call he calls this a Monty fifth, because, when you get these leading diagonals, the corrective is much more actionary looking than the diagonal itself, which is very corrective in self looking, whereas the corrective is very sharp and fast, in a typical fashion. So it's kind of a cool, like more simple way potentially that he identified that, because you see that so often where you don't find a good low yet. You haven't had that, happy divergence. So you don't necessarily make a new low in actual price, but you just get this time to find this bottom. And then you get this stab down, doesn't happen, up you go. So I like that, potentially right to this range here. So right to the 76 region, as opposed to, 67. So not that big of a difference, but Could be. Anyway, for timing, again, I still am not mega bearish. As bad as news can be in the world, I still feel like we're looking okay. Speaking of the world, let's get over to oil. So a few weeks ago, we called that we were had previously been looking for a fill of this zone because we wanted sort of a better looking corrective structure coming out of this low, and we never got it. So this is off the table, and we saw that we were retesting this downtrend line, but it's the top of that base channel. And when you do that, and I think I also outlined it as a pitchfork trigger line, which a break of a trigger line is a long signal. And as we can see, very much so, it was a long signal here. We gapped through, right? Probably the day after the video. If I made it on Sunday, this is probably on Monday. Yeah, Monday, March 2nd, I think it said. Yep. Monday, March 2nd. So it gapped up there shortly after the video. Great call, to like, everybody knew oil was going to move. We're in a war with Iran. Duh. Okay, fine. I'm not trying to take any credit on that. But where are we now? That's what we need to talk about now. So if this didn't fulfill a typical zigzag or a three-wave corrective move to the downside, what was it? Well, it leaves us a pretty limited subset of patterns of which this could be. It was clearly corrective. It didn't give us a nice three-swing move. So what was it? It was clearly a triangle. I think probably B, C, D, E. That's probably how you would draw it, and then you would just go ahead and throw your trend lines. And we're not going to worry about doing any sort of post triangle thrust, because this would have to be a B wave, not a 4 wave. It could be an X or something like that. But basically, this sort of gives us the idea that this is likely a corrective structure. Now, there are times when we see, sort of triangle-like correctives near major lows. So we're not going to completely discount that, right? Because this could be, was this a 1-2, and, was this the 2 here? And then you get some sort of crazy 1-2s that sort of break expectation. Yeah. Again, just like I tell you guys every week, it could definitely be something that isn't normal, right? But we're going to focus on what would normally be the case here, is that this is a triangle. And if this is a triangle, then with this being an impulse, this is likely a B wave. Okay. So doesn't mean that this can't be a C and then like a 1 of a zigzag, and then you get like a diagonal to the upside. It does, just because this is a triangle, and that means that this is almost assuredly a C at that point. It doesn't mean that doesn't, don't think that means anything about the broader context, because it would be far too simple and, let's say, reckless to do so. And that's just what you see very often, though, is people being reckless with these sort of assumptions. If we come here, we have made our meeting on the pitchfork on greatly increased volume. We haven't died or rejected immediately, so that is actually sort of a bullish signal. And then in addition to that, we've come up, and if we draw a base trend channel, we are right at the top of that base trend channel on a spike of volume, which is very standard and typical, is that when you get to the extremes of a channel, that whether it's a upward facing channel to be the top there, or the downward facing channel at the bottom, you do get a volume spike. Now, in a wave 3, with that expanding volume, you would expect to burst through the channel boundary. We failed to do that last week. Should we not do that this week? I would say that it is a fairly good assumption at that point that the C is in, even though, it looks like there could be some more to it. And then you would sort of have a very fake out C. And what happens then? Again, it doesn't mean that this potentially we come down and take a new low, right? Like, I'm down here towards 0. That's probably not going to happen, right? Well, what are we just talking about with Solana, right? Maybe we're going to do something like that. Maybe oil is putting in a 1 of a diagonal or something of that nature. 1, and then you're going like this, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is the worst drawing ever. And then you go up, something like this, where, instead of being crazy, it's just sort of sideways for the next few years. And there's there's a lot going on in the world that outside of this, let's say, hopefully blip of supply interruption, where that could very well be the case, where you get sort of a sideways expectation for a few years. So I don't want to read too much into it beyond this right now. I'm not making any larger degree calls. I'm waiting to see if this breaks to the upside. If it doesn't, it was probably a C, and we'll have to go from there. All right, boys. That's it for this week. I'll catch you next week. 2 out.